is the telling of their stories that makes it come alive. This morning you will hear the story of two young men from Rye who left their homes to serve in the military during World War II. And how their lives became so intertwined. Here to share their stories is a member of the American Legion and a Marine Corps veteran, Terry McCartney.
Thank you guys for coming out. Thank you all for coming out today. We appreciate you. It's wonderful to look up and see so many friendly and familiar faces. So we started this tradition of storytelling a few years ago, and this one we have today, anybody who served in the military has their small world story to tell. You know, somebody you went through boot camp with, so you know, you're in some far-flung place, you hear a familiar voice, you're like, oh my God, you know. So this is the uncommon story of Eakin and Moxhay. Incidentally, the Rye Record ran an article summarizing this story in the most recent issue and ran some great photographs. So if you know, you're enthralled by this and you want to look at the actual players, page A5 of the recent Rye Record has them there. So this is the uncommon story of Eakin and Moxhay. Two graduates of the Rye High School class of 1935. They knew each other in peace, they knew each other in war, and they both returned to Rye as veterans and involved citizens after World War II. The lives of Charles Moxhay and Elliott Eakin are forever intertwined. Charlie Moxhay was born on September 22, 1917. His family lived at 591 Milton Road and were members of Christ Church. Charlie graduated from Rye High School in 1935. He served as an officer in the U.S. Army Air Corps, which later became the Air Force, during World War II. Charlie was a bombardier on a B-17 in Europe during the war. He and his crew flew many combat missions over Germany. He served with the 452nd Bomb Group, the 730th Bomb Squadron, and the U.S. 8th Air Force. The squadron was first activated in June 1943 at Geiger Field in Washington State. While waiting there to be assigned a duty station overseas, Charlie ran into his high school classmate and good friend, Elliott Eakin. The two were eventually stationed at the same base in Great Britain, and then were assigned to the same B-17 plane with Elliott as the pilot. The odds of that, I mean, this is a huge unit in World War II. The odds of that happening are infinitesimal. Elliott Eakin was born to Constant and Margaret Elliott Eakin on February 2nd, 1918. The family lived in Manhattan for his early life, and his father worked there at an electronics company. However, when the Great Depression hit in 1929, Elliott was sent to live with his maternal uncle in Rye. He lived with his uncle and aunt, Chetwood and Julia Eakin, and their children, Harry, John, and Julia, at 2 Stuyvesant Avenue. Elliott attended Milton School and graduated from Rye High in 1935 with Charlie. In high school, he was active in sports and took a special interest in local civics. Elliott was a member of the National Honor Society, the yearbook staff, and was the class secretary at Rye High. In February 1942, Elliott was commissioned a second lieutenant in the U.S. Army Air Corps and earned his pilot wings in June 1943. Charlie and Elliott flew on 30 combat missions together. Charlie said, "I can remember at least 5 times when Eakin saved my life," and called him a superlative pilot. Eakin himself praised their crew for everyone's individual expertise and also for their teamwork, saying, "We developed a smooth working team that brought us through many a tough spot." Their plane, dubbed the inside curve after the pitch in baseball, known to be the hardest to hit, they had high hopes for their B-17 Flying Fortress, hard to hit. It flew in raids over Germany without a dedicated escort of fighter pilots beyond a certain range. I don't know how many of you are familiar with this. Tony is, he's nodding his head there. But you know, the fighter planes could go, their range was a lot less for these deep incursions into Europe to get to Bremen and some of these industrial cities in Germany that we needed to bomb. The fighters could only go so far. They only had that much fuel and they had to turn back. Well, the German fighters knew that. So they would just wait at the extent of the fighters, you know, limits, and that's where they would wait and come after the bombers, attack them from above, where they were the weakest. It was a very, very dangerous job. I'll talk about that now. These B-17s were equipped with machine guns, and so they were expected, after the fighter cover ended, to fend for themselves against the German fighters, which are much more agile planes. And you know, these bombers kind of fly on their path. You know, you got the anti-aircraft fire coming from below. You got the fighters all around them coming from above. You know, the rate of not coming back from your mission, if you were in a B-17, was like 20%. The reason they flew 30 missions is because they put a limit on it. It was such a risky, dangerous job. It started out at 25 missions and then you were done. And then they raised it to 30 missions. And then late in the war, as you know, demands increased, there were less crews, less planes, they went up to 35. But after completing their 30 missions, First Lieutenants Moxhay and Eakin were both awarded the Distinguished Flying Cross and the Air Medal for their incredible heroism. Their plane, the Inside Curve, continued service with a new crew. On its 113th mission, it was shot down over Bremen, Germany on December 10, 1944. There were no survivors. Charlie and Elliott flew as members of the U.S. Army 8th Air Force. 8th Air Force Airmen suffered the most casualties of any command in World War II. 26,000 members of that unit were killed in action. Just to put that in perspective, the entire Marine Corps lost about 24,000 in World War II. This unit alone lost 26,000. Okay? Another 28,000 from that unit became prisoners of war. Their valor was unparalleled. As the teenagers and young men of the 8th battled the enemy at 25,000 feet, such bravery earned them 17 Medals of Honor, 220 Distinguished Flying Crosses, and more than 420,000 air medals. After the war, Charlie Moxhay lived in Rye from the time he was 4 years old until he and his wife moved to Leesburg, Florida in 1994. He knew all about Rye. He was kind of a historian of the city. And his wife said, Charlie wrote 2 books, Rye on the Water and 100 Years of Healthcare in Rye. He was also the president of the Rye Historical Society in the 1980s. Charlie was also a member of the Lions Club, the Masonic Lodge, and the American Legion. He was also a Boy Scout leader in Rye in the 1950s and 60s, and he was awarded the Boy Scout Silver Beaver Award. He was also the president of the Rye YMCA in the 1970s, and he sat on the national board of the YMCA. He and his wife traveled to Jerusalem to celebrate the 100th anniversary of the opening of the Jerusalem YMCA. Clearly a special guy. Elliott Eakin welcomed a son, Brian, in 1944 and a daughter, Melissa, in 1961. The Eakins raised their family in Rye at 111 Hicks Avenue. Elliott was a member and later chairman of the Rye Democratic Committee. He worked on the school board and he had a passion for the Rye community. The family were members of the Cobley Club. Charlie Moxhay returned to Rye in October 1944 and spoke to the Lions Club. Here are his words from that day to reflect on here for us today. Fellows who have seen their buddies die before their eyes are never the same again. Lieutenant Moxhay said, they act the same, they look the same, but there's something different about them. I wish that something could be done to make civilians at home and returning soldiers who have been in combat understand each other. Perhaps today we are fulfilling Charlie's hope. Happy Veterans Day, y'all.